Jason Herzog is seen by many as the gold standard for MMA refereeing and one of the greatest referees in the sport's history. But recently, and more specifically in the last year, he has often found himself in situations where he not only makes a wrong call, but also makes a wrong call that works out in the UFC's favor, either by allowing a hyped prospect to continue surging, having a fighter from a market that the UFC is trying to break into getting an important win, or maybe something a little bit more sinister. This man has refereed hundreds of UFC fights, and I would say that for the most part, he is a very good ref. About as good as they can be. With competition like Yamasaki and Mazzagatti, it can't be that hard, right? But the real area where problems arise is when things go off the rails. It's easy to be a good referee when you're simply starting and stopping rounds, but when fouls are committed or stoppages are warranted and you must jump into action and make some judgment calls that only you can make, that's where the real problems begin. Muhammad Yaya versus Stephen Nuin, our most recent example, and an example that could make or break my whole argument. Muhammad Yaya is a fighter from the United Arab Emirates. A lot is riding on him as a hometown boy. His nickname is the UAE Warrior. You know, the country he's fighting in. He is also the only fighter from that country to make it to the UFC. Be a real shame if he lost on home turf. In my opinion, he was already given a very winnable matchup because Stephen Nuin, as we saw, has very little finishing ability. And before this, he had no wins in the UFC, just like Yaya. I think he was also given more grace than the average fighter and more chances to recover as well. If the swelling over the eye wasn't as bad, I wonder if Herzog would have let it continue. Because ultimately, Herzog didn't stop the fight, and he didn't show a lot of indications that he would either. Now this is where we go off on a limb a little bit, and we could be out in the weeds, or we could strike gold, or maybe somewhere in between. But these screenshots were floating around MMA Twitter for a bit there, and I had to look into them myself. I know very little about sports betting, so I asked some people more knowledgeable than me, and I am very aware that degenerate gamblers are the worst, most cope-filled human beings on the planet. That's just how they operate. But lots of money was placed on the over 1.5 rounds just before the fight started, like mere minutes. Another fight on the card that had kind of similar odds, Shariput Magomedov versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Bets were also made for over 1.5 rounds. Money came in quickly before the fight started, and it only moved the odds from minus 191 to minus 154. For the fight in question, the line moved from minus 192 to minus 285. A sharp increase of people suddenly thinking that a fight would go longer with two guys that are relatively unknown. If someone makes a big last-minute bet on Derek Lewis by first-round KO, we'll get there eventually, but that makes sense. This seems a little bit too niche, in my opinion. That, along with Herzog being a good ref most of the time, means my issue isn't really with Herzog being consistently bad like other refs. That can be excused with incompetence. My problem is with him being selectively bad when betting odds also decide to make random, unexplained jumps. For the rest of the video, we need to do a touch of research. So here it is, MMA foul procedures for dummies. If a foul is committed, the referee should stop the action, check on the fighter who's been fouled, and notify all the parties of the foul or any point deductions that come from it. If a fighter on bottom commits a foul, and the top fighter isn't injured, the fight continues, and the offending fighter is verbally notified that they have committed a foul. When the round is over, all the parties are notified and point deductions are levied there. If a foul is too severe, the referee can immediately stop the fight, but it's labeled as a disqualification. Now, Derek Lewis versus Talison Teixeira is a really interesting fight because Jason Herzog breaks multiple rules. The fight isn't paused because of the foul, which is fair because Talison was on bottom here, but he also isn't verbally notified of the foul because Jason doesn't open his mouth. If the foul was too severe to continue on with the fight, then according to the rules Herzog should be beholden to, this is a DQ win for Derek Lewis. But Herzog effectively made up a rule somewhere in between, where if a fighter's on bottom and they commit a foul whilst being partially rocked and almost finished, you might as well just stop the fight in favor of the guy that the UFC likes. You know who else the UFC likes? French people. Jared Cannonier versus Nassourdine Imavov is already like a year old, man. Crazy how time flies. And it is another Jason Herzog masterclass in what the fuck was that? Cannoniers up on the scorecards. I think the third round could have gone either way personally. So we're looking at 2-1 Jared or 2-1 Nasruddin. Both men were having moments. We're in the fourth round, and Cannonier gets wobbled, but he keeps moving his feet and avoiding the shots of Amavov. He's kind of running, and then he turns to face Amavov. He's alternating between these two states. Super wobbly, but still intelligent defense. Herzog makes an objectively bad call that he was ridiculed for and he apologized for. He always apologizes for his fouls. That's a pattern that I've noticed. And just because he's accountable doesn't mean it's not happening and doesn't mean it doesn't happen at very specific times. Now, if only the UFC really wanted to break into a specific European country's market where some of their other guys aren't doing too good, could be something there. If the UFC is allowed to circumvent US tax law by giving fighters extra bonuses in the back and quote-unquote taking care of people, what's stopping them from doing some minor fight fixing or at least stacking the deck? And what better way to do it than with a referee who everybody sees as extremely reputable and doesn't make very many mistakes unless it matters, unless it's a mistake that counts. But he doesn't make those that often. That's what everybody will have you believe, but he kind of does, especially in the last year or so. They've been really relying on him to kind of pull some strings, in my opinion. And our final discovery for today. Jason Herzog loves Chinese food, and I can prove it. Zhang Minyang versus Anthony Smith, everyone's favorite beating, especially this guy. I've talked about this before, but there are quite a few infractions. Back of the head shots, with elbows and punches, spine shots, almost uses an illegal knee or an illegal kick to a grounded opponent. But if we're going to use Anthony Smith as a stepping stone to get Minyang into the rankings, even though Anthony Smith himself probably shouldn't have been ranked, we might as well commit by letting him do whatever the fuck he wants. Because we need him to headline our China Fight Night later this year. Henry Cejudo versus Song Yadong is great because you get to kill two birds with one stone here. Build up Song Yadong as a man who beat a former UFC champion, and you get rid of Cejudo because he was a thorn in your side anyway. Herzog doesn't disqualify Yadong despite him committing eye pokes and continuing to hold his fingers out towards Cejudo, even though Henry is already maimed. This is after 2 low blows as well, so a total of 4 fouls that have had a detrimental impact on the fight, and still no repercussions. The fight isn't stopped in the round where it technically should be, it's carried onwards, so they can get Song Yadong a technical decision win instead of the no contest that it really should have been. And our final example of Jason's Kung Fu fever, Weili Zhang versus Yan Xiaonan. UFC 300, pretty big card, but people forget quickly. Weili finishes her at the end of the first round with a rear naked choke. Xiaonan is limp, and Herzog wakes her up, helps her up to the feet, and directs her to her corner. Now, these are 2 Chinese fighters, so you may be asking, what's the difference here if either of them win? They get the Chinese market either way, which is clever matchmaking, but there is a better option, and that's Yan Xiaonan winning over Zhang Weili, because the UFC is not above trying to shake up divisions using shitty means. Making Nunes fight through an injury for Juliana Pena, standing Shevchenko up when she was winning on the ground and working and trying to get things done, which opened up some of the opportunities for Alexa Grasso to win. The real money is in the novelty of an upset and the prospect of a rematch. That is the only way that you can make someone care about women's MMA. So does stacking the deck in favor of these Chinese fighters because the UFC is trying to break into that market make sense? I think so, and I don't think that it's outside the realm of possibility. All of these examples have happened over the last 2, maybe 3 years. There have been minor things here and there, but the really controversial ones that I've touched on in this video have always seemed to be in the UFC's favor, or perhaps Jason Herzog's wallet's favor. There is still a decent chance that this is all a coincidence, but I can promise you that I will keep my eyes open for any Jason Herzog related shenanigans, but you must do me a favor in return. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this, and if you liked this video, you'll probably like this one as well. It's about another ref being sketchy that should be right up your alley. Let me know what you think about Jason Herzog and all of these coincidences in the comment section below. Like, comment, and subscribe for more MMA content. Shout out to Shauna, Proletarian Gothic Lamb Slayer, and Vanny for being vampiric enjoyers. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't bet against the Chinese when Herzog is involved, and have a good time.